अकाल चैनल ਨੂੰ ਸਬਸਕ੍ਰਾਈਬ ਕਰੋ ਨਵੀਂ ਵੀਡੀਓਜ਼ ਦੀ ਨੋਟੀਫਿਕੇਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਲਈ ਬੈਲ ਆਈਕਨ ਨੂੰ ਕਲਿੱਕ ਕਰਨਾ ਨਾ ਭੁੱਲਣਾ
Welcome to another edition of the Insight Show with myself, Jaswant Singh Bora, here on the Sky Akaal Channel. On today's show, I have an exclusive interview with a football player, and some of you may know, way back from the 70s and throughout the 80s. His name is Bob HAZEL, and he's here with me on today's show. Welcome, Bob, to the Insight Show.
Hello, Jav. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you very much for coming, and we are kind of privileged to have you here and give and take what you've done and your background. Just to really start with that, you had 266 league appearances over a 12-year, or give and take, career from 77 to 89, 90. You represented England under the 21 level. You played
under
for
18,
under 18, sorry.
under 21,
Under 21,
and the B team.
and the B team. Thank you. You also played for Wolverhampton Wanderers, which
Which
are
is
now
where
the
I
Premiership,
started.
and you got to the FA Youth Cup final. I think it was 76,
with QPR.
With-
No, that was 82.
82. But you attended the Youth Cup final with Wolverhampton Wanderers.
That's correct.
right,
Yes,
yeah.
yes. The Youth Cup final.
Queen Park Rangers, about 1970-80. You helped them, your skill for them to get out from the second division, and they played in the FA Cup final 1982. I was around. I was a young nipper, but I was there. And you moved to Leicester City,
Yeah.
which obviously again their glory came in 2016, winning the Premiership.
Yeah.
And we saw the celebration in Leicester. That was around 1983. And you played for Reading and Port Vale, so a very interesting career, Bob.
Yep. And you seem to got everything there, mate.
Especially, this interview, we're talking around. We've had one previously on this show. We talked about racism in sport and other subjects with special guests that were on there. It was an interesting discussion, but the whole nature of today, it's really to sort of explore from a player's perspective, especially one like yourself, Bob. And we know here in West Midlands we've had outstanding players from the 70s, 80s. Cyril Regis made a very impact. Somebody that I know you've known personally.
Yeah.
And obviously he passed away, and that was a big loss. Helped you yourselves and him and others revolutionise this game of football at a time that was quite tense and challenging. But in terms of as a player, Bob, you see and experienced a lot, and just to really build upon one of my other shows that we were talking around some of the challenges. What was it like as a player, even a young black player growing up, and for the people that have been watching at the show, what was it like playing at a time where what was perceived to be quite hostile, challenging for players from ethnical, from the Black Caribbean, other communities, in very profound leagues such as, probably Division 1 and or now obviously what we call the Premiership and things like that?
Well, the first thing is, what was it like? It was absolutely thrilling. It was exhilarating, because for any young person to grow up and to realise your dream to be a professional footballer, there's nothing that any young person could want other than to go out there and to materialise their dream and become a professional footballer. So, into saying what was it like, it was tremendous. It was out of this world, and I would give up anything to have those days back again. And of course, that is the positive side. Yeah. And at the end of the day, I'll always want to default back to the positive side, because that's where my best memories were. That's where my best memories are. Yes, as I say, there was a lot of racism that came from the terraces. But, you know, I'm 60 years old. People will tell you that at that time, racism permeated the whole of the British establishment. It still does now, but not as blatant as it was then. But as I say, you didn't have to be a footballer to really experience a lot of that racism. But one of the things is, as a footballer and being out there, you're stood there in the middle of the pitch, you know, and then you've got all the fans, or, you know, when I say all of the fans, you know, all those behind the goals, and they're giving all these racist chants and things like that. But remember, firstly, you're in this arena, you're in this gladiators arena, so whether you're getting booed or anything else, yeah, there are times where that is just really exhilarating. Of course, somebody like me now who believed I could absolutely hear everything coming from the terraces, yeah, there were times where it got you down. And would you believe a lot of those times is when you're losing, if you can well imagine.
The fans are already aggressive and they're hostile,
Exactly.
they want to take it out on somebody,
Yeah.
so why not take it out on particular players from particular backgrounds?
And you know, I remember, and I am going to call names if you, but
Yep.
I mean, I remember later I was playing at Queen's Park Rangers, and we went to Shrewsbury. Oh, and I'll tell you, from the time I put my foot over that white line, I just got nothing but abuse coming non-stop from the terraces. Now, if I say to you it wasn't troubling me, it wasn't having a negative effect on me. But what kept happening was every time I went up for a challenge, the crowd would roar and, you know, and screaming for a foul. And every time the referee blew the whistle, and he gave a foul for every single challenge. And I remember going up to him and I said, "Referee, come on, you can't hear the crowd. We're professionals. Let them do what they're doing out there. We're here. We got a job to do.
Focus on the game." Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I said, you've pulled me on every single challenge that I've made. I says, come on. Next time the ball comes again, up in the air, straight through, headed the ball. He gave a foul against me again. And then I just turned around and I went, you. And then used words that I was not supposed to use.
Give and take at the time, the predominant class of referees will be from probably a white or middle class kind of background.
100%.
And then obviously that was difficult in itself because there's probably already, if I can use it, a disadvantage for some knowing that it's a white, because we've got a few more black referees and we see them at World Cups and European Championships and Premierships, which is obviously a good move, obviously. But at that particular time, as you said earlier, you had to experience and go through something that was very exhausting, draining.
Oh, yes.
And obviously you've played with the likes of people like Sil Regis, some of them who at West Bromwich Albion was almost a demigod to them in terms of his contribution. So you as players must have really talked a lot, and as particularly black players, because there's not many Asian players all being from the BMA community, and really a knit together a network where you were trying to support each other during that turbulent time, if I could use it.
Well, and when you talk about support, you know, it was almost as if everybody knew that they had to stand strong for themselves, because if there were players that found it difficult, there wasn't much that anybody else could do for them. And would you believe, Jazz, one of my first engagements with racism was as a youngster. I'm about 14, 15 years old, and I go to watch a West Bromwich Albion game, and I'm on the terraces in the Bromley Road with all the West Brom fans, and there's this 17-year-old black lad on the pitch, and he's getting some terrible racist abuse from the people who were stood around me. These are the West Brom fans. And I can remember, you know, they'd be screaming, "Oh, you black so-and-so," and then they'd look at me, and I could see them weighing me up. "Oh, he's a youngster, we can say whatever we want." And that 17-year-old on the pitch was a 17-year-old Brendan Batson playing for Arsenal. and as I say, the irony is he ends up being one of the gods at West Brom, and as I say, that was one of my first real encounters of racism from the terraces.
You're saying that you've played for different teams, and we introduced some of that at the beginning of the show. From Wolverhampton, which is a very diverse ethnic community now. Queen's Park Rangers, which is on the other end of the spectrum, different class of diversity up there. To Leicester, which is diverse. In your experiences, Bob, where would you say you experience more of the hostility as a player in terms of experiencing racism? We talked in our previous show around grassroots and the researches that people are doing, but as a player, and this is probably one of the best perspectives to hear it from, where would you say you experienced? Was there a vast difference going from city to city?
How about if I give you this one? I am a 16, 17-year-old at Wolves, and I'm training one day, and as I say, I grew up in Handsworth. I went to school in Edgbaston, and so when I signed leaving school at Wolves, they took me in digs. So I was with this sweet old lady, you know, and she really was good company, and I know that I was company for her as well. And then I'm training one day, and the coach just calls me. The senior coach, he just come and went to the other coach and went, "Bob," and pulled me out of the training session. And he went, "Come on, get your clothes on, we've got to go to your digs." And I'm going, "What for?" "Don't worry about it, just get your gear." And, you know, can you imagine my heart's going, and I'm thinking, what's the problem? And I'm going around, what have I done? What have I done? And we get in his car. So I'm going, "Brian, what are we doing?" "Don't worry about it, Bob, don't worry about it. And it's not your fault, it's nothing to do with you." And I'm just sat there, you know, and I'm thinking, why won't he tell me what it is? Then he drove me to my digs, and he went, "Go up and get your things, you're moving out." And I'm thinking, what on earth for? So as I'm going into the house to go and get my gear, the landlady stood there, and she went, "Bob, I told you about that music, playing that music." And I'm thinking, what music? Because, you know, I had an old tape player, and you know, with the one thing that I put in my ear, so she didn't know whether I loved rock and roll, Beethoven.
She's just making a
or any
stereotype of something.
Yeah, and I get in the car, you know, I've grabbed all my things, and I've got in the coach's car, and I've gone, what? And he went, "Bob, listen, don't worry about it. It's not your fault." He says, "What it is, she's an old lady on her own, and what's happened is her neighbours have seen she now has a young black boy living with her, and they've stopped talking to her. And they're all her friends and everybody she knows, and they have a problem with it, and she just can't live with it, that they stopped talking to her." And I then had to move out of my digs where I was staying in Wolverhampton, and as I said, I went there. That was when I was 16 years old, and that was my first welcome to Wolverhampton.
No, that's something that's stayed with you, and but you fought past that, you worked through that, but obviously it was a very nice encounter.
But and so I think what I'm trying to highlight is, you know, people might say that had nothing to do with football, but that was just about England at that time, you know. And we say, and we'll look now, right, and go, well, you know, look at the makeup of Wolverhampton now, yeah. But whether, I mean, that could have happened in Wolverhampton, it could have happened, you know, in Handsworth Wood, it could have happened anywhere.
It seems, in terms of progression, we're in 2019 and we're talking around some of the 70s. Football clubs that were owned and run predominantly by white middle class, which is points that are made in we talked in our previous show. Debates in the House of Lords, one was about discrimination in sport, and obviously football came up, and these points were coming out. Yeah. But today we've got clubs owned by Europeans, or, you know, we talk around who own Chelsea, we're talking about Manchester City from Arab Emirates, and these are individuals where years ago it almost seemed difficult, but now these people have the money and the power to come in and almost bailing out the Premiership from certain financial crises and problems and challenges. Yeah. You know, so there again, the strength and the extent of the contribution from BME and other communities, both at a you know, corporate level.
But here's another irony, and we talk about the likes of Manchester City and other foreign owners that come from whether it's the Far East, in India, or from any of the oil Arab states. But you look at the clubs that have found themselves run into problems. They have been Europeans and Americans who have just come over, and they've just looked at the football club as a cash cow, a money-making machine, and they have taken away, they've gone in there and they drain the football club of all the resources, and then they leave the club in stuck. And if I take you back a few years, can you remember back in the day at Wolverhampton Wanderers, one of the first non-British owners would have been the Barties, who went into Wolverhampton Wanderers. And I know that there was a lot of Wolves fans who were thinking, oh, the Barties ruined the club. But there wasn't, the news that came out always showed them in a poor light, not knowing that they came in to rescue the club, and they had certain assurances from the city council who let them down. And those assurances that they gave them, they ripped them up and then left them to bail the club out on their own, and the promises that they made them, they didn't keep them. And as I say, all the news that came out about them was in a very negative, a poor negative light, in this is how the Barties ruined Wolverhampton Wanderers. So far from the truth.
Well, yeah, and we can see the extent of how they are playing now, and there's a lot more international players within the Premiership, even the Championship, as we watch the games on a week-by-week basis. In terms of, obviously, you've seen quite a lot growing up as a player. To what extent, in terms of underrepresentation or lack of representation, are, say, Asian footballers, where we see research where a lot of them not even looked at, and we've got a lot of black and African players in the sport of football. Very few, and I know that you probably may have seen it as you were coming up, even to the latter end of your career, this transition that was going on. Why would you think there's a lack of representation of, say, Asian footballers, yet to the extent that they are skillful, or is there a stereotype attached to them where they're just interested in cricket and other sports, but there are aspiring, say, even boxers or potential footballers that have the potential to play in the Championship or the Premiership?
Do you know what tends to happen? And if I say to you, for every black player, or say for every, let's say an African player, yeah, there's a funnel, and the top of it is that wide, and then it funnels down, and then you know, when it comes down to the end, it's like that big. So there are just millions that go in, and then a few come out. And one of the things that I would say is that there are a lot more black and African players that enter that mulch, yeah? Whereas in cricket, there are millions of Asians who go into that, and then it comes out.
And we just had the World Cup 2019 and
exactly,
Bangladesh,
and
India,
then
Pakistan.
Exactly, and look how well, and that is because there are more Asians, as I say, whether they be Bangladeshi and Afghanistan, whatever, that go in there at the top. So when it comes down to that and cricket is very much the same in that at the end, that you know, what comes out at the bottom is just a small, just a fraction of that enters. And as I say, my belief is that a hell of a lot more Asians have to enter and have to fall by the wayside. But I will go on and say that there are you know, young guys who I played with at school, and they looked as if they had the ability to go on. Now at that time, if I say to you, they didn't have that confidence, and like me, it was my life. You know, football was about my life. That's what I was going to do. Nothing was going to stop me. And even with all the obstacles, there's only so much people will put up with.
In terms of, because a few minutes we got left, bringing some sort of balance or promoting some form of diversity or quality in the sport. Would you like to see, give and take your experiences over the years and at the early stages of football, in the same era as John Barnes and other people that were playing, do you believe or feel now we need more managers from BME community or the black communities managing the game, making certain decisions? We've heard about it from the House of Lords that it's controlled predominantly by white middle class, and in doing so, will that bring the balance to the game that we so desperately needed to ensure the safety and security of other communities? Absolutely,
because you know, from where the studios are here, you only have to go up a few hundred yards, and that's where Darren Moore grew up. You know, and he goes into Albion, and a lot of people like myself, you know, was really excited to see him go in there. And then later on, after a few, and I wouldn't say poor results, but indifferent results, he gets fired. Now,
yes, he did an excellent job in securing certain stuff, and
I think there's such an injustice in that.
Yes,
and I look and I think, well, are Albion going to use that same measuring stick to measure the next man that comes in? Because there's going to be a lot of people, especially people like me, who's going to be watching every single result that West Brom have, and then when that manager now has lost the same amount of games that Darren Moore is.
Exactly. Or will we see some form of favourable treatment on the basis of race or something else?
Well, there we go. And whether they say it's not a racial thing, yes or no, it's very hard for people from outside to say anything different, because
well, he did a phenomenal job. He beat the likes of Liverpool. His last few games is a bit like boxing in the heavyweight division against you're just an up and coming and you're fighting for the world heavyweight title. So in that sense, he was not expected to win all the games, which he did. He secured what he had to do, and obviously he was on the points difference. So I don't think anybody would probably have, if he was of a non-BME or black whatever community, would have come in and probably achieved that degree of success. And I think the other players have tried to come from players and manage and felt that kind of effect or impact as soon as they move into management. I'm not saying it's all directly related, but we can look at each individual case and probably put a few things together, because there are some clear indication of facts that the issues of racism institutionally at the top end of the sport, on the pitch, is actually happening and is actually taking place.
Well, we know that to be the case, and I'm sorry we're about to finish now because I was here like having fun, because one of the things that they never talk about as well, as we say, is that of referees. Oh, it's the people on the outside that are racist. The players might be racist. Your teammates may be racist. Those who pay their money to watch the game, they're racist. But the racism permeated throughout the whole of the game. Yeah, so
different divisions.
So that included the referees, and that included the FA, because I remember going to the FA and like appealing to them, because there were times where I think that I was unjustly sent off, and the chair looked at me and he just said, "Do you think you're the only black player who's playing in the first division? Well, let me tell you something. If you don't like the way we do things, you know what you can do? You can take yourself out, can't you?"
It seems kind of harsh from somebody who's supposed to be representing the game and be able to make decisions in the interests of, rather than against it. And I mean, you hearing statements like that, you're wondering, well, why bother?
Well,
and then that sends out a different message to other players, and now we've got so many different diverse players. And somebody, as I said, we hear about Casey, but as you said, FIFA, the FA, and some of these organising and governing bodies also need to, in your view, being a player, need to be held accountable for certain decisions, or they need to have people selected on particular boards that reflect the diversity of community. Would you agree to that?
100%. 100%. And until they open their doors and allow things like that to happen, because even if you look at the football associations now, even the amateur ones, the people that have been on there, I hear that they've got like average time spans like of 55 years. I mean, go back 30 years. If you go back 30 years, how many black people was around 20 years prior to that, who would have been looking to get onto a board of directors in a football club, or even to be a member of the FA in a local FA? It's just not heard of.
What we need, and listening to you, Bob, is, and we see John Barnes campaigning, as we're concluding, is some more other policies in place that promote that, and they need to work to some of these policies that need to be designed specifically and exclusively for these types of players to get these kind of positions. We need, as you said, other forms of legislation that governing the sporting sector and industry that seek to promote that. We've got existing civil or criminal aspects to it, but we need more within the game and the sport that we can go about. So if it's a particular role, whether it's promoting international players or people from India, different countries, we need certain representatives that reflect that. If it's controlled, for example, by some white middle class, then you understand there's going to be, as we're hearing, very less coming through the system as a spiral, as the example you gave, as opposed to somebody who's employed from that particular background. And as we see it with managers, they go out, and you've seen it, people come and watch your games and, oh, he's aspiring on to put him into the England team or Argentinian team or whatever team. And I think that's probably needed, some of that kind of approach to sort of bring some sort of
and there must be an assessment at the end of it, and they look at the policies that they're having, and they should have a policy to review to see the impact of these things that they're doing, because so often you find that it's just idle chatter, and as I say, at the end of the year or whenever, if you was to do an impact assessment, you'll find that the changes are minimal, if any.
So obviously there still seems to be, as far as you're concerned, some reforms, or some radical reforms to address some of these issues. You've played in some of the teams that are well known, Queen's Park Rangers and Leicester and some of these teams. In Wolverhampton now they're doing quite well. You know, it's probably people like yourself that provide that sense of representation that we reflect. So them coming to yourself or other players who've played at time, just to get some insight and experience of how it can be dealt with, is the way forward. Then we've got current players now who are playing, you know, all the up and coming ones, and Raheem Sterling experienced a lot of racism and others. And obviously he needs that kind of support network or people around him who are mature, who exercise a strong degree of rationale in dealing with some of these issues, rather than him being left to others who may not seem to be doing things in a particular favour. So maybe that's discussion with him and say how is he feeling around, and some of these players that are experiencing it more. Yes, we've made strides, but there is still, would you agree, a long way to go?
Well, most definitely, and I am particularly pleased to see the likes of Raheem Sterling will come out and actually put their head above the parapet, because as you well know, Jazz, you know, people who put their head above the parapet gets their head shut off. And you know, it was good that Raheem was actually playing well and at the top of his game, and then he chose to make his statements when he did. So for me, well done, Raheem, and let's have more of it.
Well, Bob, it's been a privilege. Thank you very much for coming on to the show and sitting next to an individual who, you know, I was growing up watching the football. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for coming on to the Insight Show, and thank you for the viewers watching this exclusive interview with Bob HAZEL regarding the issue of sport and football. Until next time on the Insight Show, I'm your host Jaswant Singh Bora. Take care and thank you for tuning in, and God bless.
ਸਬਸਕ੍ਰਾਈਬ ਕਰੋ ਨਵੀਂ ਵੀਡੀਓਜ਼ ਦੀ ਨੋਟੀਫਿਕੇਸ਼ਨ